Shepherd, it is awful good to be with you again this morning. As they mentioned, those of you here, it is so nice. It feels like home again in so many ways. And so it is nice to have volunteers back in the building getting ready for Sunday mornings and learning some of those new processes. It is just good to see your faces. The joke lately has been that most of you get to see us, but we don't get to see any of you. So it's so nice to have you coming back home to shepherd with us. And for those of you who may not be ready to head back yet, don't worry. We are excited to have you joining us online as we continue as well. But in this process, it has meant that as we get ready to have people back in the building, that has meant that staff is moving back in a little bit more as well. And so recently I found myself headed home after a day of meetings, getting ready during the week. And when I get home, I don't spend my evenings usually dressed like this all that much. They don't work as play clothes with my daughters. And so I usually find a way to slip into some shorts and something else. And so when I get home, I was changing my clothes and my daughter hopped up on my bed. And when I get there, I'll often just kind of empty my pockets and toss things out. And I tossed this down. And I know you can't see that, but this happens to be my ID badge for the Washington County Sheriff's Office. And Vera picked it up, and she kind of inquisitively looked at it, as 4-year-olds do. And she said, Dad, what's that? I told her, I was like, well, that helps people know that it's okay for me to be there. When I go into the government center, when I go into the sheriff's office, this tells them that I'm okay to be there. As well as when I'm out in the community, when I am out serving, when I walk onto a scene with deputies and with others, this hopefully tells the deputies it's okay for me to be there, but hopefully it also tells the community that I'm out there to serve, that I'm there for them, that I'm there to be a resource. And my title as pastor sometimes does that, but this certainly plays into my identity. It helps identify who I am. And I think there's a lot of different ways that we build our identity. For me, some of my identity is built around being a son, being a brother, being a husband. It's also built by serving in the community as I go out and do that. It's built by being a pastor here. My guess is there are a lot of different ways that you could classify how your identity is being built up. But identity sinks into us. It's the things that make us. It's our values. It's our beliefs. It's the way we live. But then I think, and in my mind, partly because I thought about going into marketing and advertising, I then translate into being a personal brand. If you are out looking for a job right now, as I know many are in our communities, you're building a brand, and it's your skill set, it's your beliefs, it's who you are, it's your past that want to communicate something to a potential employer, but those things also communicate kind of who we are to the people we interact with. Like I said, I hope that my title as pastor communicates care and compassion to the residents of Washington County as I go out to meet with them sometimes on the worst day of their life. There's a variety of things that build into that, but we have this personal identity, and then we kind of have these personal brands. And like I said, they communicate, they interact with those around us. And as Jesus followers, I think we also carry with us then the Jesus brand, right? Philippians talks about how we become a new creation in life. And as Jesus reshapes us and remolds us, we become different. Our identity changes, our behaviors and our brand changes as well. But I think we have to think about how that communicates out. How does Jesus reshaping my life and my attitudes and my beliefs, how does that translate into what I show to the world? Often in baptism, right, we talk about the mission statement of Christ, and that was to let our light shine before others that they may see our good deeds and give glory to our Father in heaven. And it stops me to ask, does my personal brand, does the interaction of my identity with the world around me, does that communicate effectively the light and glory of Jesus? And that's part of, I think, what our series is about. As you've been engaging with us these last few weeks, we're in this series called Over the Long Haul. And in that, we're looking at Hebrews chapter 11, these faith-founding fathers, these people that we can look to that had faithful but imperfect lives with Jesus, or with God and with faith, and they shaped their identity and they shaped their behavior. And this week is the same. We're going to look at another person, another faithful person from the Hall of Fame. But ultimately, I think it drives us to a point, and it's seen in Hebrews chapter 12, right after we've been given this list. And this is what Hebrews chapter 12 says about the reason we talk about these faith founding fathers. And it says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, these fathers, these faith Hall of Famers, this cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. It changes us in that. And then, out of that, after we've thrown those things off, let us run with perseverance the race marked off for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. And in that, we get shaped. We allow our faith to change us and the ways that we interact with the world. And so we're going to look at a guy named Moses today. And most often Moses is known as I'll call him the brand builder for the nation of Israel. Right? He's seen as this strong leader, the one that had the gall and the courage because of God to stand up to Pharaoh and go back time and time again into the royal household, and then to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt and through the Red Sea, and then ultimately for 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. Moses is this great leader. He's connected to God. He is strong. He is in touch in a way that I think many of us want to hear from God and be shaped by God. But before Moses could do any of those things, before Moses could help God build or be the mouthpiece to God building the Israel brand, Moses had to build his personal brand. He had to make some tough choices on what life was going to look like and how his faith was going to lead him forward. And that's what Hebrews talks about. That's one of the things that Hebrews focuses on. And it's found in Hebrews chapter 11, starting in about 22. We're going to pick it up in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 24. It says this: by faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Instead, he chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt, because he was looking ahead to his reward. And there's this great picture. Yes, we know that Moses didn't know Jesus, that they would come hundreds of years apart. But what the author of Hebrews is talking about is that Moses knew there was this promise out there. Moses knew that God was doing this work to lead the people forward, and he was going to fulfill the promises he had made to make Israel this great nation. And we see that fulfilled in the person of Jesus. And so they're looking forward to the reward for the sake of Christ. And I think the question we have to ask then is how are we being shaped? How is our faith, like Moses's, shaping us and moving us so that our light shines before God and before others in new ways? I think the first thing comes out of the beginning of the text, in that we must choose God's people. We must choose God's people. And see, for Moses, that meant choosing to be identified as a Hebrew. See, his life would look different depending on which way he went. If you remember Moses' story, it shows up in the book of Exodus, in that Moses is called by God early on in a unique way. The beginning says, by faith his mother saved him from what would have been a certain death. And then he's found by Pharaoh's daughter, and he is taken into the royal household. So Moses, born an Israelite, now gets to grow up a royal in the nation of Egypt. And I can imagine a little bit maybe about how that wrestling would have gone. As he grows up to know the Israelite religion, as he worships in their temples, and yet knows about this history that he has as an Israelite. As he grows up knowing the law and the codes and maybe being a slave master or some sort of royal position in Pharaoh's house, and then yet seeing that living and abiding by that Egyptian law and rule enslaves the people that he knows he's connected to. It enslaves his aunts and uncles and grandparents and nieces and nephews. And so there's this tension. Moses is kind of living in these two different worlds, and he has to choose who he is going to be identified as. And Moses, at this time, decides that he is going to choose to be known not as the son of Pharaoh's daughter, as Hebrews says, but that he would identify himself with the Israelite people. Man, and that just builds all kinds of tension, doesn't it? You have this adopted mother that has raised you in the lap of luxury, and yet you want to be identified with the slaves. The Israelites may have wondered what this was all about too, as they watched Moses grow up, and maybe some of them cheered him on, maybe some of them despised him because he was part of this ruling group of people. But he certainly had a tense relationship, at least a little bit, with the Israelites as well. And so his choice doesn't come easy. Just like I think our choices in faith don't always come easy. We find ourselves today living kind of with a foot in two worlds. The scholar N.T. Wright points out that in our lives today, if we call ourselves Christians and Jesus followers, then we kind of live with a foot in two different worlds. On one hand, we live in the kingdom of God in this already and not yet. We know Christ has come. We know he's coming again. He has inaugurated the kingdom. And on the other side, we still live in this world. We live in its structures and its powers and its inequalities and its goodness, and we live in this tension between the two. The question is, where are we going to continue to put our priority? Where are we going to choose to have our identity placed most of the time? And it comes out in all kinds of ways. Right now, there's so many ways that we can be identified. We can be identified as a mom or a dad. We can be identified as a Republican or a Democrat. We can be identified as mask or no mask. We can be identified in so many different ways, right? But we have to choose some. We have to choose what our witness is going to look like. One way we've talked about that around here has to do with these silly things called masks. Nobody likes these, do they? I have yet to meet one person that says, yes, I get to wear a mask every day. But the way we respond to these does say a lot. It begins to show the witness that we have out into the world and where we want to put our priorities. See, we can think about it this way. The thing that we put out there most, the thing that we interact with the most, begins to build our brand. And so the way we've talked about it around Shepherd is that the way we want to lead in this season, the way we want to live in this season, is communicate the most care to the most people. And so we have tension on our staff around masks. And this isn't a political thing. This isn't the rights thing. But as we have chosen to take a posture, before the Minnesota governor decided that masks were going to be mandatory, we made some tough choices around deciding that we were going to be a place that wore masks. Not because we wanted to follow the rules, not because we thought or feared something, but instead we knew that we had people in our community that were really concerned about their health. We're really concerned about the people they had at home and what was going on around them. And so to help calm some fear and to build a community that leaned in with the most care possible, we decided to be a masked community. We decided to wear masks as part of who we were at this point in time. And there's going to be a variety of opinions politically, and there's going to be a variety of opinions around the health guidance and the research that goes on. I understand all that. but what do we choose to put out there? How do we choose to interact and choose the people that we're interacting with? Choose the people that God has designed and put in our place, that God so loves and cherishes, just like he loves and cherishes us. And we decided that wearing masks would be the way that we would communicate care to the most number of people. And that begins to be part of our identity, part of our brand, the way we witness to the world, to show care and compassion. I mean, right now, there's so many ways to cause tension and strife around us, aren't there? I mean, simply from what we decide to post and share, the memes that we let fly on social media begin to shape the way we are seen individually and as a community. And it depends on what we want to put up as our highest value in life. That is often what gets communicated. The Apostle Paul actually said it really well as he is talking to the church in Corinth. And he's writing about the way he interacts with the law, the way he interacts with people. And he highlights his highest value, the thing that he believes in the most. And this is what he writes. He says, though I am free and belong to no one. He's not under the law. He's a Roman citizen. He can travel wherever he wants. Paul is as free can be in the communities he lives in. He has found freedom in so many ways. And yet, he says this, I have made myself a slave to everyone. He takes this posture of a servant instead of his freedom. And he says, to win as many as possible. And I love that line because that's going to show up again and again. It says, to the Jews I became like a Jew to win the Jews. And as Paul works that out, you see as he's in conversation with the Jewish communities that he travels to, he understands what table fellowship looks like. He understands what the Jewish law and Torah look like. But then as he moves into other communities, he says, to those under the law, I became like one under the law. And he's clear, though I myself am not under the law, I am so as to win those under the law. See, he has a purpose, he has a goal in the way he interacts with those around him. And then he says, to those not having the law. So as he goes about in the general Roman world, as he's moving from city to city and talking in synagogues and not synagogues and communities, so those not having the law, referring to the law of Moses, I have become like one not having the law. Though I am not free from God's law, I am under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law. So as he moved into areas that weren't organized by the Jewish Torah system, the law system, Paul understood that he could eat meat that was sacrificed to idols because he knew it didn't have any power over him. He was able to have table fellowship and to move into circles with those around him. And he says, to the weak I became the weak to win the weak. I have become all things to all people so that by all means possible I may save some. Paul knew that his highest motivation was to bring people to Jesus. And he knew he could interact with different groups of people and have conversations and lead them to Christ as he chose not to have his identity as a Jew and the law that he grew up as. That wasn't his highest value. He wasn't going to force people into that mold. But on the other hand, he wasn't going to choose to tell people and all people, just throw it off. We don't care because we're free. Instead, as he interacted with those under and those not under, he was able to hold up Christ as his highest value. He held up his witness as his highest value in all things that he would do. He wanted his brand to be shaped by Christ. And so what we want to do is we want to choose God's people. We want to choose to interact with those around us, knowing that we want to honor them in ways. Paul says this in talking with the church in Philippi. He says, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, any comfort in his love, any fellowship in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete, being like-minded and having the same love, being of one spirit and one purpose. It says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Instead, but in humility, consider others better than yourselves. And each should look not only to the interests, but also to the interests of others. Paul wants us to lead with others in mind. And part of that we see come out of Jesus. I think over and over again what Jesus models for us is that Jesus wants to show care and not condemn. Jesus chose to care and not condemn. As he interacts with the woman at the well, and he comes face to face, and she realizes that he knows her past, and he says, yes, I know that you have had 5 husbands, and the one that you live with now is not your husband. In this moment, he can lean in, and he can condemn, and he can lay down the law and show her all the ways she's gone wrong, but instead, he leans in with care and compassion. The woman caught in adultery was clearly breaking the law. She was out of bounds in the structures that were set up. She was breaking relational ties. She was breaking ties with God, and yet he invites the people around. You without sin may cast the first stone. You see, and that shapes the interaction, because then he leans into her. After all of her accusers are gone, he says, I don't condemn you, but go and sin no more. He leans in with care. And I think the one that shakes me a little bit most often is in relationship with Peter. Because, right, the sin that you just don't do is you don't, discount Jesus, right? That's what all of us don't want to do. And yet, as Jesus comes face to face with Peter after his resurrection, knowing that Peter has just denied knowing him 3 times, what does Jesus do? He leans in with care. He leans in and restores Peter to his ministry. He restores Peter to the interactions and ministry and life that Peter is going to fulfill. Jesus leads with care in all that he does. I mean, it comes out in John. We often talk about John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish but have everlasting life. But it goes on, John 3:17. For he did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. See, so often in what we do, we want to point fingers and we want to show how, so it's all about us, and it's all about what we know, and it's all about our rights, and it's all about the things that we have and we want to hold on to and the power that we control. We want to show people how they're wrong, and we want to point out their differences. But Christ leads us in a different way. He wants to bring people close with care and compassion. And if we do that right, if we do that well, what is ultimately going to be true, and what we see out of Moses, is that our brand will cost us something. You see, our brand will cost us. In the text with Moses, it says that he had to give up the pleasures, it says the pleasures of sin, but the pleasures and the goodness that comes from being identified with the royal household in Egypt. Right? That must have been good. That came with a good education. That came with power and authority and money and good living. As he was identified with being part of that royal household and that royal court. And yet, he chooses to come into conflict with that, to separate himself a little bit from that. Again, it's going to cause tension. It's going to cause a damaged reputation as he, again, maybe Pharaoh doesn't like the fact that he's identifying himself as an Israelite. Maybe Pharaoh wants to move him and shush him and get him out of the way so that no one else decides that they can step out of bounds. See, it cost Moses something. One of my favorite texts about Jesus comes out of Matthew chapter 11. And it's Jesus actually talking, and he says, you know, when the Son of Man came, talking about himself, he said, the people around me call me a friend of tax collectors and sinners. He says, my reputation, the way that I'm being perceived, my brand in this world is one that is coming into tension with the religious leaders of the time. He says, because what I want to do is I want to get close to those who are different. I want to get close to those who are on the outside. And so he eats with tax collectors. He hangs out with sinners. He doesn't separate himself the way that the religious leaders did at the time. You see, Jesus sets up his behavior and his patterns differently based on the relationship that he has with God. And it put him on the outs. It cost him a reputation. It ultimately cost him his life, right? As the religious leaders finally get fed up with this teacher that's going around proclaiming not only that he's God, but that they are acting inappropriately. You see, Jesus most often critiques and criticizes the religious leaders, not the others. And so when we move in this direction, when we choose to show care and concern, when we move towards God's people, and we want to identify that as our highest value, it's going to come in conflict with the people around us. Because no matter where we sit politically, no matter where we sit socially in the hierarchy of kind of how our social strata happens, we will find ways that we are in conflict with the world around us. That being Jesus people will set us up in conflict to the world around us. As we know the truth, that we live in a kingdom that has so much yet to come. As we lean into that. Because the last part, if we are going to choose God's people, if we're going to move in the direction of people and show care and concern, if we're going to be willing to risk the cost that it's going to take us, ultimately that comes down to the fact that we are the Jesus brand. That we are the Jesus brand. See, as each one of you sets up your identity, as you shape your values and beliefs and the way that you live those out, your brand comes into interaction with the world around us. And the way brands work, right? Whether it's Apple or Coca-Cola, one that I'm a big fan of in their marketing. I'm looking forward to the Christmas Santa, I'll be honest, in Coke marketing. You see, but when our brand interacts with the world around us, that's ultimately how it gets shaped. Brands get shaped by the way they are seen from the outside, not by the way they self-identify. And so as each one of us interacts with the world, our brand gets shaped by the way we come into contact with people. But then as we gather together, all of our brands shape the Shepherd brand. As we interact with the valley, as we serve our neighbor in a variety of ways, we shape the way that Shepherd is seen in the valley. Every time I walk on scene with a call with the sheriff's office, and I show that badge to let them know that who I am and it's okay that I'm there, I also introduce myself as a pastor. And I tell them the community I'm a part of. And that shapes the way that I am seen, that shapes the way that we are seen. And the same is true of you. Everything we post on social media, every way we interact with the world around us, every time you serve or every time you cut somebody off on traffic, luckily we don't have Shepherd stickers yet, but every time we cut somebody off on traffic, that shapes the way that Shepherd is seen. And as we as Christians all band together, that is ultimately the way that Jesus is seen. We are the Jesus brand. That was Jesus' plan on earth. As he moves in us, as he reshapes us, right? As we are a new creation in him, we get reshaped and we get molded, and then he sends us out into the world. He sends some of you into big corporate offices at 3M, at Ecolab. You ride the bus down into the city. And all of those interactions shape your brand and they shape the Jesus brand. Every time I come in here, every time I go to Target in Hudson, or I go get a meal at a restaurant out, I shape the way I'm seen, and I ultimately shape the way Jesus is seen. And that is both terrifying for me and hopeful for me. Jesus proclaimed in a beautiful way as he's teaching his disciples at the end of his life. In John 13, as he kind of begins to portray to them what life is going to look like as a disciple. In John 13:34, he begins, "A new command I give you." Right? They'd been living under lots of commands, but this one he reshapes their identity. "Love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. By this all men will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." Shepherd, we have an unbelievable ability in the world around us that is being filled with contention and argument and vitriol and all kinds of pressure around us. We have the opportunity to show people the goodness and love of Jesus. Think about the memes you share. Think about the ways that you interact with the clerk when you go to the gas station, when you go to Target. Yes, we have to put on uncomfortable masks, but smile with your eyes. They don't like wearing the mask any more than you do. They're feeling the tensions around us just like we are. Let's find ways with our friends and with our neighbors, with the speak that we get the opportunity to do, with the actions in our hands that we can use. Let us lead with love in the way that Jesus would have us care for our neighbors. Let's pray. Lord, we give you thanks that you moved toward us with your grace and your love. Lord, that in all that we do, in the still moments, in the tough times, Lord, that it's your grace, that it's your love that ultimately shapes who we are. Lord, maybe remind us, Lord, that first time we knew who you were and that joy that it brought us. Lord, when we come to know you, when we begin to get reshaped by you, man, we have a new perspective on life. Draw us back to that moment. May that joy, may that transformation, may that new creation, may that lead us with love. May that lead us to the people around us with grace and with truth, so that when they come into interaction with us, that they may say, that is a Jesus person. And I want to know